At my brother's engagement dinner, a commercial loan officer thanked me for guaranteeing the warehouse he was celebrating. My name was Elena Park. I was 33 years old. I had never signed a loan application for Luke's company. The dinner was being held inside the warehouse itself, a 60,000 square foot brick building on the south side of Grand Rapids. Luke had rented round tables, hung warm lights between the steel beams, and parked one of Northline Furnishings delivery trucks beside the temporary bar. Behind the head table was a banner printed in gold. Luke and Cecily, a new life, a new home for Northline. The warehouse had become part of their engagement story. Luke told guests that Northline would soon furnish 3 boutique hotels across Michigan. Cecily's parents had invited local developers, business owners, and several people from Lake Michigan Community Bank, which was reviewing the expansion loan. I had come for Cecily. She had always treated me like a person instead of a service Luke could call after business hours. I had also promised myself that I would make it through one family event without fixing anything for my brother. That plan lasted 23 minutes. Priya Shah introduced herself near the beverage table. She was a commercial loan officer at the bank. I recognized her name because Luke had mentioned her during the 6 months he spent trying to finance the warehouse. She shook my hand and said it was good to finally meet the person standing behind Northline's expansion. At first, I thought she meant emotional support. Then she said the bank still needed my original signature on the guarantee package Monday morning. I asked what guarantee package she was talking about. Priya's expression changed. She glanced toward Luke, who was posing for photographs with Cecily beside a display of furniture samples. She asked whether I was Elena Park. I said yes. She asked whether I was withdrawing as Northline's supporting guarantor. I was never a guarantor. Priya stopped smiling. She did not argue or try to explain Luke's side. She asked me to send her an email immediately stating that I had not authorized the use of my financial information. She could flag the application that evening, but the formal review would have to happen at the bank. Before I could answer, my mother stepped between us. She had been watching from the head table. Mom asked Priya whether there was a problem. Priya said she needed to clarify my role in Northline's application. My mother smiled too quickly and placed one hand against my back. Not tonight, Elena. It was the same tone she had used my entire life whenever the truth arrived at an inconvenient time. I told her the bank believed I had guaranteed Luke's warehouse loan. Her hand stopped moving. She did not look surprised. That was the moment I knew this was not a clerical mistake. Mom asked Priya to give us a few minutes. Priya handed me her card and said the bank would pause any further processing until she heard from me. The moment Priya walked away, Mom took my elbow. Don't pull this crap tonight. I removed her hand and asked what she knew. She said Luke had listed me as temporary family support because the bank needed more confidence in the application. The warehouse lease, equipment purchases, and expansion payroll had pushed the request above what Northline's current numbers could support. According to Mom, nothing serious had happened. No money had left my account. No final document had been signed. Luke only needed the strength of my salary and credit profile until the hotel contracts began paying. She described my financial life like a folding chair the family could borrow for the weekend. Luke reached us before I could ask another question. His smile stayed in place until he saw my face. He looked at Mom first, then at Priya across the room. He said the bank should not have discussed the application at the dinner. I told him the bank would not have had anything to discuss if he had left my name out of it. Luke explained that the application was preliminary. The final guarantee still required my signature. In his version, that meant I had not been committed to anything. I asked why the bank already had my income, employer, home address, savings balance, and credit information. He reminded me that I had given him financial documents before. That part was true. 14 months earlier, Luke asked me to consider becoming a small investor in Northline. I completed a draft personal financial statement so his accountant could explain what participation might involve. Then I reviewed Northline's numbers. The company was growing, but its cash flow was unstable. Luke had signed long-term storage agreements before several client contracts were final. He regularly used deposits from new work to finish older jobs. The profit margins looked healthy until unpaid invoices and late vendor bills were included. I told him I would not invest, co-sign, guarantee debt, or allow my finances to support a loan application. I sent the decision by email because Luke had a habit of remembering conversations in whichever version helped him most. He replied with 2 sentences. "Understood. I'll figure something else out." Inside the warehouse, Luke claimed he had understood the message as a refusal to invest cash, not a permanent refusal to support the company. "That's bullshit, Luke." His expression hardened. I reminded him that the email specifically said I would not guarantee company debt. Mom stepped between us and said Luke had 32 employees whose jobs depended on the expansion. I asked how many of them had agreed to put their credit behind it. She said no one was putting my credit on the line. I asked why it was in the application. Luke looked past me toward the guests and asked whether we could stop turning his engagement dinner into a financial hearing. I reminded him that he had invited the bank, potential clients, and half his business contacts to celebrate a loan that depended on me. He said he only needed the bank to keep reviewing the file. Once the hotel contracts were final, he expected the numbers to support the loan without me. He had planned to talk to me before closing. I asked why he had submitted my information before that conversation. "Because you would have said no." There was no misunderstanding in that sentence. Luke had not assumed I would agree. He had acted because he knew I would not. Mom said I was blowing the situation out of proportion. No money had been taken, no payment had been missed. The application could still be changed. Then she looked at me and said the sentence that explained our family better than anything else had. "You were going to spend that money on 1 bedroom and a balcony. Luke is trying to keep 32 people employed." My condo was a personal indulgence. Luke's warehouse was a family emergency. Dad joined us after noticing the argument. He asked whether any guests had heard. When Luke said no, Dad looked relieved. Only then did he ask what had happened. Mom told him Priya had confused me about a preliminary document. I said the bank had listed me as a guarantor. Dad suggested we wait until Monday. He spoke as though the main problem was timing rather than consent. I asked whether he knew Luke had used my name. He said Luke had mentioned additional family support. That was enough of an answer. I took out my phone and emailed Priya. I wrote that I had never agreed to guarantee, co-sign, invest in, or provide financial support for Northline's loan. I had not authorized anyone to submit my information. I requested that the application be paused until the bank completed a formal review. Mom watched me press send. "You're really going to screw your brother over tonight?" "No, I'm stopping him from screwing me over." Her face changed. She reminded me that Luke had a fiancé, employees, and a company tied to the warehouse. I had a secure hospital job, savings, health insurance, and no children depending on me. "You'll recover," she said. Luke may not. She knew there was risk. She simply believed I was the child the family could afford to damage. Across the room, a server carried champagne toward the head table. Guests laughed under the warehouse lights. The gold banner behind Luke's chair promised a building he did not yet have the money to keep. My phone vibrated. Priya had replied. The application was flagged. The bank would contact us the next morning. For the first time, my family's opinion of me had a loan number attached to it. The engagement speeches never happened. Cecily found us near the loading dock office. She had removed the event badge pinned to her dress and was holding it in one hand. Luke gave her a condensed version of the problem. He called my involvement preliminary and said the bank had interpreted a support document too broadly. I told her the bank believed I had agreed to guarantee the warehouse loan. Cecily looked at Luke. "You said the guarantor was confirmed." He answered that he believed it would be. She asked whether that meant he believed I had agreed or believed he could convince me later. Luke told her not to do this in front of his family. "You brought the bank and half your client list. You made it everybody's business." That was the only argument Cecily needed to make. Mom tried to frame Luke's decision as desperation, She said marriage required understanding that people sometimes cut corners when others depended on them. Cecily asked where Luke had gotten my current financial information. He admitted Mom had given it to him. 2 months earlier, I had shown her that I was finally close to having enough for a condo down payment. She asked to see the number because she said she was proud of me. Luke used the screenshot to show the bank that his family had liquid reserves. Mom insisted she had only forwarded information. Luke had decided how to use it. His broker had decided how to present it. The bank had decided how to evaluate it. Each person had supposedly performed one harmless action. Nobody wanted responsibility for the full sentence. My mother gave my private savings balance to Luke so he could strengthen a commercial loan application I had already refused to support. Dad said the information could be removed in the morning. Luke insisted the warehouse would make Northline stable enough that my guarantee would never matter. Mom returned to the employees, the hotel contracts, and the future Luke was trying to build. I stopped arguing. The family had already chosen its defense. The warehouse was necessary. Luke had been under pressure. Nothing final had been signed. I was financially secure. Those 4 claims were supposed to erase the only fact that mattered. I had said no. The event coordinator approached and asked whether the speeches should begin. Cecily looked toward the tables filled with business contacts, relatives, and hotel representatives. Then she asked her parents to move the guests to the restaurant next door. The engagement dinner could continue. The warehouse presentation was canceled. Luke said canceling the business portion would make him look unstable. Cecily told him presenting an unfunded expansion would make him look worse. Guests collected coats in confused groups. The lights remained on. The banner stayed behind the empty head table. One half announced a marriage that had not happened. The other announced a warehouse Luke could not yet finance. Mom blamed me before the final guest left. She said I could have waited until Monday. No money had moved, no payment had been missed, the application had not closed. You wanted Luke's success to be public, I said. You only want the way he got it to stay private. She called me cruel. Dad said I had made my point. I had not made anything yet. All I had done was stop the application from moving for one night. On the drive home, Talia called me. She worked beside me in payroll operations at the hospital and knew I had been planning to tour condos that month. I told her my information had been used in a business loan I never agreed to support. She did not ask whether Luke had meant well. She told me to freeze my credit before I reached my apartment. I pulled into a grocery store parking lot and did it from my phone. Then I changed the password on the cloud folder I had once used to share financial documents with my parents. I revoked every active link. I checked my credit reports and found an inquiry from Lake Michigan Community Bank dated 3 weeks earlier. It was marked as authorized through Northline's application. I saved a copy. At home, I searched my email for the message I sent Luke 14 months earlier. The relevant paragraph was plain. I will not invest in Northline, personally guarantee company debt, co-sign a lease or loan, or allow my income, savings, or credit profile to be represented as financial support for the business. Luke's reply was directly below it. Understood. I'll figure something else out. I forwarded the email chain to Priya. By midnight, I had a folder containing the refusal email, Luke's response, the credit inquiry, screenshots showing Mom had forwarded my savings balance, and Priya's confirmation that the application was paused. I sat at my kitchen table staring at Luke's reply. The family would still call the situation a misunderstanding. They would say the email was old, the business had changed, and Luke had expected to talk me into helping. But the 2 sentences on my screen proved something simpler. He knew I had refused. Everything after that had been a decision. The next morning, Priya met us at the bank branch. Luke arrived with his commercial broker. My parents came together. Cecily drove separately. The meeting took place in a small conference room with a glass wall facing the lobby. There was no warehouse banner, no champagne, and no audience to impress. Priya explained that the bank was not making a legal determination about fraud. It was reviewing whether my information had been submitted without authorization and whether Northline's application could continue without it. She placed a copy of the application in front of me. My name appeared beneath Luke's as a supporting personal guarantor. The file listed my employer, salary, home address, savings balance, and projected ability to cover almost 9 months of debt payments. The amount beside my name was my condo fund. Priya also showed us a document titled Guarantor Support Statement. It said I had reviewed Northline's expansion, supported the warehouse acquisition, and intended to provide financial assistance if business revenue became insufficient. My name was typed at the bottom. There was no signature. Luke called it a draft. The broker confirmed that Luke had emailed it to him with instructions to include it in the supporting package. Luke said he expected to obtain my approval before closing. Priya asked whether I had authorized him to submit it. I was going to get her on board. That was not consent. Priya read my refusal email and Luke's written response. The dates showed he had acknowledged my decision 14 months before submitting the support statement. Luke argued that the company had changed since then. Northline had new contracts, more employees, and a larger opportunity. He believed my answer might change once I understood what is at stake. He had never asked. Instead, he had mentioned the warehouse at Sunday dinners, complained about the bank, and waited for Mom to translate his business problem into my family duty. When I did not volunteer, he moved forward without me. The pattern was familiar. When I was 19, my parents said they could not afford to help both children with college. I worked evenings in the hospital billing office and borrowed the rest. 2 years later, Luke left a business program after 1 semester. My parents paid the tuition balance and cleared his credit card debt because he needed a fresh start. At 26, I had saved nearly $18,000 toward a down payment. Luke needed 2 delivery vans after losing a subcontract. My parents asked me to lend him $12,000 without a repayment plan. When I declined, Mom told relatives I cared more about a number in my bank account than my brother's future. At 28, Northline changed payroll providers without testing the system. I spent an entire weekend rebuilding import files and correcting deposits so 41 employees would be paid on time. At the next family dinner, Dad praised Luke for holding his team together. When I mentioned my work, Mom accused me of keeping score. Inside the bank, Luke used the same accusation again. The damn scoreboard. It's not a scoreboard, it's the pattern. Dad said parents helped children according to need. Luke had needed more support. I had always been independent. Mom said the family trusted me because I was stronger. You always land on your feet. That doesn't mean you get to keep knocking me down. For once, nobody interrupted. The truth was not that my parents believed Luke's choices had no consequences. They believed I was better equipped to survive those consequences than he was. His mistakes became emergencies. My plans became optional. His ambitions belonged to the family. My savings were available capacity. Priya brought the discussion back to the loan. Northline could submit a revised application without me. The bank would reassess the amount based on Luke's personal guarantee, the company's assets, existing contracts, and any other willing support. The broker warned that the full warehouse project would probably no longer qualify. Dad asked whether he and Mom could replace me. Priya said the bank could evaluate them if they voluntarily submitted their finances and accepted the obligations attached to a personal guarantee. Mom asked whether their house could be exposed if Northline defaulted. Priya explained that a guarantee was a real financial obligation, not a symbolic show of family support. Mom said she needed time to think. Luke had already checked their finances. Their mortgage, retirement timeline, and lower income made them less attractive than me. My parents had spent the previous night describing the risk as small. The moment it reached their house, it became complicated. I looked at Luke. Then put Mom and Dad on it. No one volunteered. That was the moment their definition of family help collapsed. They had never believed everyone should sacrifice for Luke. They believed I should. Priya gave me an unauthorized information statement. I confirmed that I had not agreed to the guarantee, the support letter, or the credit inquiry. I signed my actual name beneath those facts. The bank removed me from the active underwriting file. Luke said I had just put 32 jobs at risk. I reminded him that he had hired and expanded before financing was secure. Those decisions belonged to him. Priya asked one final question. Why had Luke submitted the support statement if he knew I had refused? He looked at the file instead of at me. Because they would have stopped the application. That sentence ended every misunderstanding argument. Luke had not used my name because he believed I agreed. He used it because the truth would have stopped him. My mother sent a family email before noon. She wrote that I had sabotaged Luke's warehouse financing during his engagement celebration because I had always resented his success. She said Luke mistakenly believed I would help, but no binding guarantee had been signed. She described my reaction as disproportionate and asked relatives not to spread gossip about a private family misunderstanding. The email had 14 recipients. Mom had made the story public while asking everyone else to keep it private. Old versions of me would have replied immediately. I would have corrected every sentence, explained every year, and tried to prove I was not jealous, cold, difficult, or obsessed with money. That had always been my position in the family. Luke acted. My parents defended. I explained. The explanations never changed anything because the verdict had already been chosen. This time, I waited until Priya sent written confirmation that my information had been removed from the loan file and the credit inquiry was being reviewed. Then I replied to everyone. I did not call Luke a criminal. I did not accuse my parents of conspiracy. I wrote that Mom's email omitted the reason the bank had paused the application. I attached 4 documents. My original refusal, Luke's response confirming he understood, the support statement submitted under my name, the bank's written confirmation that I had not authorized my inclusion. Beneath those documents, I added a short timeline. At 19, I financed most of my college because my parents said they could not help both children. At 21, they paid Luke's tuition balance and credit card debt after he left school. At 26, they asked me to lend Luke most of my down payment savings without a repayment agreement. At 28, I repaired Northline's payroll problem without pay and was later accused of keeping score when I mentioned the work. At 32, I refused in writing to guarantee Northline's debt. At 33, Luke submitted me as a guarantor anyway, using updated financial information Mom gave him. I ended with 5 sentences. I did not sabotage a loan I never joined. I did not withdraw a promise I never made. Luke received my refusal before he submitted the documents. Mom knew my savings information was being used to strengthen his application. I will not debate these facts further. I pressed reply all. For 11 minutes, no one responded. Then a cousin asked why Mom had called it a misunderstanding when Luke's written reply showed he understood. An aunt remembered the van request. She wrote that Mom had told everyone I refused to help Luke, but never mentioned there was no repayment plan. Another relative asked how many times I was expected to start over so Luke would not have to. Dad called me. He did not apologize. He asked why I had dragged college money from 14 years earlier into a current business problem. I told him Mom had accused me of never helping Luke. The timeline showed what helping Luke had meant in our family. Dad said parents did not owe children identical support. I agreed. Then I asked why every extra opportunity for Luke had required something from me. He said they trusted me to handle more. Trust would have meant asking. He told me I was making them sound like terrible parents. I said I was describing what they did. For a moment he was quiet. Then he returned to the warehouse, the contracts, and the employees. No matter what Luke did, his next consequence became my responsibility. I told Dad that Northline could still apply without me or find a willing guarantor. He said nobody else had my credit profile. That was exactly why Luke had taken mine. Mom sent another email that afternoon. She wrote that my timeline proved I had kept a private ledger of every family kindness. Strong children were sometimes asked to carry more because parents trusted them. I answered once. Trust would have meant asking me. Using my name after I said no was not trust. Luke called that evening. He sounded exhausted rather than angry. He said the hotel contracts were real, the warehouse was necessary, and he had already hired additional employees based on the expected work. I asked why he had hired people before the financing was secure. He said business owners sometimes had to move before every detail was settled. I told him a guarantor was not a detail. Luke admitted he knew I had refused. He said he expected to convince me before closing. The support statement was only supposed to keep the application alive until then. He still believed I should have helped. I had a stable job, excellent credit, and more savings than I needed. He had employees and a company that could change the family's future. I asked which part of Northline belonged to me. He said I was missing the point. I asked what percentage of the profits I would receive for carrying the debt risk. He said family did not calculate help that way. Luke had calculated my salary, savings, credit capacity, and ability to cover 9 months of payments. He only objected when I calculated what he expected from me. He said I had spent my life playing it safe while he was trying to build something. What, a savings account? A life you thought you could borrow against. Luke went quiet. He believed his future was an investment. Mine was collateral. Northline did not collapse. Without my financial support, the bank would not fund the full warehouse project. Luke negotiated a shorter lease on a smaller building outside the city. One hotel contract was reduced, another was delayed, and several planned hires did not happen. The consequences were serious. They were also connected to decisions Luke had made. For the first time, my parents could not place them under my name. Cecily postponed combining finances with Luke. She asked for a complete list of his personal and business debts before setting another wedding date. Luke told relatives I had created distrust between them. Cecily corrected him once. The distrust came from discovering that his biggest expansion plan depended on consent he never obtained. I stayed out of their relationship. It was not my responsibility to decide whether Luke could become trustworthy. It was my responsibility to stop making his trustworthiness unnecessary. 3 weeks later, Mom called during my workday. Northline's office manager had found a tax reporting discrepancy. Mom wanted me to review one spreadsheet before the filing deadline. I reminded her that Luke needed professional payroll support. She said hiring someone would cost thousands of dollars. I said Northline had paid for warehouse space, trucks, a commercial broker, branded furniture displays, and a photographer for the engagement event. It could pay someone to handle payroll. Mom accused me of punishing Luke's employees. I sent her the contact information for 2 payroll consultants. I did not open the spreadsheet. I did not offer to check the work afterward. I did not apologize. Before the warehouse dinner, I believed my family failed to notice how much they took from me. Afterward, I understood that they noticed. They called my ability to recover a reason to keep taking. I placed a long-term fraud alert on my credit file. I changed the email and verbal passwords attached to my financial accounts. I removed every tax document from the family cloud folder. I sent Luke a written notice stating that I would no longer review Northline's payroll, vendor records, contracts, financing documents, or software problems as a family favor. Requests could still be made. My answer would no longer be assumed. By spring, I was ready to look for a condo again. I had delayed the plan twice. The first time was after my parents asked me to lend Luke the down payment money. The second was when I postponed viewings to repair Northline's payroll. This time, I kept the appointment. The condo was on the second floor of a small brick building near Riverside Park. It had one bedroom, a narrow balcony, and kitchen cabinets that needed replacing. It was not impressive enough for Luke to call an opportunity. It was mine enough for me to want it. At the mortgage closing, the loan officer reviewed my employment, credit report, savings, and monthly obligations. There was no Northline debt. There was no guarantee. There was no note saying my brother's future had a claim on my income. Only my name appeared on the borrower line. While I signed the final disclosure, my phone lit up with a message from Mom. Luke's smaller warehouse had failed an inspection. She wanted to know whether I could help him calculate the payroll impact of another month's delay. I read the message. Then I turned the phone face down and signed the final page. Afterward, I sent her the same 2 consultant contacts. I did not explain why I was unavailable. My family had spent years treating my stability as unused capacity. If I still had time, money, knowledge, or good credit after meeting my own needs, they believed the rest belonged to Luke. The warehouse loan made that belief visible. The boundary afterward made it unusable. Luke could still ask for help. My parents could still believe I should say yes. But my name, credit, savings, and professional work were no longer family resources unless I chose to make them available. The story began with my name on Luke's loan. It ended with my name on the one I chose for myself. What would you have done if your family used your financial future after you had already said no?